Californians are being told to turn up thermostats and not charge electric cars as officials warn of possible power shortages amid a heat wave where rolling blackouts are on the table. In the meantime, this comes just a week after state regulators approved a policy that would ban the sale of new gas cars in the nation's largest auto market by the year 2035. So is the policy putting the electric cart before the horse? For more on this question, we are joined by UC San Diego professor and Brookings senior fellow David Victor. Also, Derek Morgan, who's executive vice president of the Heritage Foundation. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. You can't really make this stuff up to be having these warnings issued literally a week after the state is pushing for more electric vehicles. In fact, no gas vehicles to be sold in just 13 years' time. Derek, what do you think?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really ironic, and it's really a warning sign for the rest of us. It shows that an over-reliance on renewable energy is both costly and unreliable. Electricity prices in California are about twice as high as my state of Virginia. And you see that the reliability problems are huge. And it's only going to get worse with the push towards electric vehicles. The California Energy Commission put out a study that said that EVs by 2030 would add anywhere from 8 to 25% to the grid. So it's not going to be possible.
Hey, David, I had people calling me a boomer last week when I pointed out that California's grid is not really up to the challenge when you start talking about having more and more electric vehicles mandated. Granted, they've already got the most electric vehicle sales in the country, 16%. But the idea that you're going to be told you can't even buy a gas car there, is that really not being smart about how they're making sure they're diversified, to not have any diversification when it comes to this?
Well, they're going to have to pay attention to investing on the grid. We have an old-fashioned power crisis right now. There's not a lot of evidence that this current power crisis it's because of electric vehicles or because of renewables. But when you look over the future, exactly as Derek says, you're going to have to expand out the grid. You're going to have to invest in more. I think it's actually feasible to do. California's had some really, really ambitious goals, like phasing out sales of new gasoline cars in 2035. And it may well be that they're going to have to stretch out those goals. I would see those goals right now as a first draft, and then they're working really hard to see what's feasible, and they may adjust them.
David, what about Derek's point that California power prices are already twice the prices in a state like Virginia? This is a grid that has been underinvested in for a very long time and has massive, massive problems. Wildfires that have been set because in some cases the reports have shown that this infrastructure goes back 100 years, needs to be replaced and replaced now.
Yeah, that's true for the whole country, I think, to some degree. California's grid is expensive for a lot of reasons. Some of it is renewable power, exactly as Derek says. Some of it is that land prices are really high in California. So it's really hard to acquire land and operate and so on. Everything else is very expensive in California. So right now what we have is a shift to more and more renewables. I don't think there's a lot of evidence that that shift to renewables right now is actually causing the reliability problems. There's a whole lot of work going on right now to show how you can have a lot of renewables, not 100% renewables, but a lot of renewables, and then also keep the grid reliable. But we got to focus on that. We got to invest in those technologies and put them into place.
Derek, you look around, and these problems are not unique to California. This summer, we've seen it in China, where they rely on hydroelectric dams, and there's been a water shortage, a drought that's hit the area. Or when you look at Europe and the incredible reliance they've had on what to this point was cheap Russian natural gas that Putin is using as a real weapon against them at this point. I think if you look at anywhere where there's an over-reliance on one particular form of energy, you can get in a situation like this.
I think that's right. And I would just push back gently on the idea that there's not evidence that renewables are responsible to some degree, because in the energy bulletin that went out from the state ISO, they pointed to the fact that solar panels will not be as effective from 4 to 9 p.m. And so they're asking people, particularly in that time frame, not to use large appliances, not to charge their electric vehicles, and to turn off the lights, and also to not have the temperature below 78 degrees. If that's a glimpse of the future, it's not a future I want. So if we have the idea of states as laboratories, I think we can say the Green New Deal is failing in California.
David, your response?
Well, California's not doing the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal, I think, is not really what's on the table here. And the core problem right now in the power crisis in California is demand is massive because we have a heat wave. And what's happened is that peak in demand has shifted a little bit later in the day. But the core problem is the total volume of electricity that can be generated. Now, Derek's exactly right. We need to be careful that we don't overinvest in any individual source. I'm concerned that California is going to become overly dependent on solar. We need to also invest in wind, and especially on gas-fired power plants that don't cause any emissions. And I'm a big fan of keeping the nuclear plants open if we can do that in an economically responsible way. But that's the thing that all these different places around the world are grappling with. The Europeans were too dependent on natural gas, and so then they now need to come up with a different plan. And the thread that runs through all of this is diversity is really, really important for these electric power systems. But at the same time, we have to find ways to cut emissions. I mean, these emissions are causing global warming, and that's kind of part of the reason why demand is rising more rapidly than we originally expected.